Hello, ladies and gentlemen, George here, aka Corporal Curious. What I'd like to do for you today is provide you a comparative perspective and an overview of the rule sets between gliders and paratroops. Then what I'd like to do is go over my log for rehearsal for Crete so you can see an overview of how procedurally everything proceeds and we place glider and paratroops on board. So right off the bat, if you look at the rules governing gliders and paratroops, uh, the first concept that is introduced is usage. And what does that mean? It means that you can use paratroops and gliders and glider-borne troops, providing the weather conditions are correct. And where that is delineated is in Echo 8.1 and Echo 9.1 for paratroops. Personally, I don't know why they could not combine those two rules into one and paraphrase a little bit, make the rules for weather for airborne troops a little bit more succinct. I know I didn't pronounce that right, but hey, I'm doing the best I can. So what is important, the crux of the matter though is that the weather conditions need to be right in order for gliders and paratroops to be introduced. The second item that's important is, of course, is wind direction, and you can find the rules, the rule for wind direction under Bravo 25.64. The wind direction and the wind strength will govern how, in which direction the gliders will land and how much of a drift the paratroops will have. Arrival. Paratroops and gliders do not arrive at the same time. Gliders arrive during the attacker's movement phase, whereas the paradrops can start the procedure in the rally phase. Okay, entry and drift. So for a glider, you need to establish the initial landing hex, and you need to take into account the 5 preceding hexes prior to the landing hex, because that will determine whether your glider came in successfully or not and landed correctly, or did it overshoot its target or undershot its target. For paratroops, there is a random selection of the board if the landing DR is not accurate. So that's under Echo 9.12. If the landing zone is determined not to be accurate, there's additional drift within the newly selected board. And subsequent to that, there is the drift of each stick, which means that you have to do almost like a sniper rule to see where the parachute will drift as it descends. However, you need to keep in mind 2 exceptions. The German white die direction drift is halved fractions rounded up. However, for the Russians, it's 1.5 times the white die fractions rounded down. And that's the reason why that is because the Germans prefer to do their paratrop from a low altitude, where the Russians did it from a high altitude. Defensive fire. So in order, well, before we go to defensive fire, let's take a look at loss. So aerial range is under E7.25 and E.5, and essentially all that is, to, in a few words, and I may not be doing justice because there, as you may know, there are lots of detail. Is basically if you have a hex of a range of 3 hexes, it's actually 6 for aerial range. That's the short and small of it. However, you need to do more reading after this video in order to get a better understanding of everything. Defensive fire. For glider, it's covered under E8.21, and basically you're firing on the IFT against a glider using the star row. All right, and then you also need to be aware of damage and how damage is governed under E.41. For paratroops, however, what is diametrically different is that they're subject to hazardous movement. glider troops are not. And the paratroopers cannot be attacked twice by the same firer. No residual for firing at paras. Not subject to PTC or pin or heat of battle. Eligible firers. Not everybody can fire up in the air. You can read more about that in Echo 8.21. Only small arms and light AA for defensive fire and subsequent first fire. No to hit, no sound, or fire lanes against paras. E 9.32. All right, so evasive action. If a glider gets hit and on a certain die roll, evasive action might come into play, and you have to determine a new initial landing hex via random selection. More on that in E8.211. Landing. So here we come to landing. Landing is based on a DR less than or equal to 1, subject to certain DRMs. More of that in the relevant rule section, close to or on E8.22. So for paratroops under E9.4, after defensive subsequent first fire versus aerial paras may move 1 hex in any direction except Germans, then land at base level. Offboard landing, E8.221. So what that means is if you have an offboard landing and you have to determine if your landing die roll is successful or not, you have to take the 5 hex consecutive grains. Let's try that again. 5 hex consecutive grain is in the opposite direction is used. And it's called a reverse order technique to determine which units are broken or eliminated. Also reference under E9.41. Crash and injuries. So crash pertains to glider troops. It's covered from under 8.23. If the glider lands successfully, it's flipped on its green side. Everything is done well. A glider can land and subsequently to that get wrecked, which it remains on the board and is a +1 hindrance. E9.42, if landing in certain terrain types must pass a normal morale check base 7, and that's for paratroops. In particular, if you're landing on a building or trees. And there's a couple of other terrain types that you need to look into, and that's under E9.42. If it doesn't pass that morale check, it must deploy into half squads, with one of the half squads moving 1 hex in a random direction. So, advanced phase, route phase, and close combat phase. During the attacker's advanced phase, contents of the glider are placed on board for the first time as per Echo 8.4. For paratroops under E9.5, if a player turn where landing takes place, paratroops may not land or attack or route. Not land, I'm not too sure about. I think that's an error on my part. I'm going to have to double check it. Echo 9.6, advanced phase, paras may not advance. All chutes are removed from their components and their components are placed on board, because the para counters and the glider counters are in fact initially cloaking counters. Right. So let's take a look at let's take a look at the log. I have it loaded up here. Let's make it a little bit smaller so you can see the action taking place. And this is rehearsal for Crete, scenario U23, and this is the log. So let's see what's going on. So we're at the actually the Allied setup. We're looking at the Corinth Canal, which from my perspective, it's not really an accurate depiction, but I could be wrong. All right, let's get right to it. In this case, the Allies go first. and then the axis go second. So good old Mark is trying to entrench, rightfully so. And notice that he has most of his troops, or if not all of his troops, under cover in woods. And I probably said this in my previous video that the Stukas were very ineffective. And now we're establishing landing zones. Let's zoom into that landing zone. Drop point number 1, right there, Y6. Let's continue. Here's my drop point number 2. So drop points should refer to paras. And this is why we're talking about now which direction the sticks will come down in. And in terms of the turn, axis rally phase. So these drop points are for paratroops. They're taking place in the rally phase as per my little summary before. All right. And we are determining the random selection. And a couple of the para drops did not land where intended. So as you can see, I have one para drop close to the board edge. And let's zoom out. Let's go flying in our little storage. Oh, they're close enough, eh? But last thing we needed is to go off board, especially and far away from your objective. That's even worse. Let's zoom back in, and this is the letter chit that we got in order to do drift. And what do I mean by drift? Let's see. Drift is the type of drift I'm talking about is E3.75. Okay, so this little chit here, purple chit, the letter chit, is to resolve drift subsequent to the paratroops not getting their desired drop point via random selection of the boards. You could technically reestablish the same board, select the same board as before. However, now you no longer are entitled to the drop point that you selected. You have to select somewhere along row 5, and then you draw a letter chit to figure out exactly where on the board you're going to land. All right, let's go on F. So instead of landing on this side of the board, boom, you're now all of a sudden on the other side of the board. So I went through random selection. There were four boards, I don't recall, but instead of landing on one side of the board, I'm now on the other side of the board, which makes it life a bit difficult. Not terribly difficult, but here you go. Oh, and then subsequent to getting that F5, I did another DR, and boom, I'm on the edge of the board. Direction, distance, die roll. Let's go on. Again, more random selection. There's another power drop did not land where he was intended to drop. Now, instead of having 3 power drops were close to the objective, and here's where the other drop point came in. Right, okay, let's go on. 6 and 1. It's going off board. There you go. Yeah, what can you do? Not much, not much, George. Here we go. 2-1 hex grid created off board. There it is. Boink. Off board landing right off the bat. Trying to get that hex grid aligned so we can put that stick of parachutes. Here the little circle is reminding me that, hey, you can choose one hex grain or the other, so you have 6 different directions. Once you select the direction, all the other sticks have to basically respect that direction. It's as if the airplanes are all coming in the same direction. All right. There we go. And pretty soon, I'm going to start putting paratroops on the board. Here we are. Where are we going? We already put some paratroops somewhere. Actually, we're moving them under their cloaks and whatnot. Let's go on. Here are the sticks. There's the drop point. Here come the paratroops. This is the hex grain I selected. There's a couple of other paratroops going off board. Notice that the some support weapons have their own chute and they might end up going somewhere else. And you have 1, 2, 3 sticks, and they all just scrambled like scrambled eggs all over the board. Whereas your key objective now, we only have 1/3 of the forces to try and take the bridge. That is probably heavily guarded. And here comes the cavalry to the rescue. It is now, I'm betting it's now my movement. No, it's still rally phase. I probably forgot to turn the track forward. But anywho, it looks like the gliders are coming to the rescue. We are establishing the initial landing hex for each glider. And we're looking at the preceding 5 grain hexes because they will modify the landing DRM to make sure that we've successfully landed as opposed to crashed into the woods. So here we are, we're establishing where the paratroops are going to land now. Now, in all fairness, I could have selected better hexes, and notice the wind direction. They're all going into the wind. Well, with my basic knowledge of model aviation, I'm saying I want those planes going into the wind, and into the wind means facing the arrow of the wind direction, not the opposite. Yeah, anyhow, let's continue and see how this game evolves. There was some fire on that glider. It looks like he took evasive action. Well, he was damaged by AA fire, light AA fire. There you go, damaged. He successfully landed. It's all good. Here we go with AA fire. He successfully landed because the 5 preceding hexes prior to his landing hex are all clear, so he had a clear avenue of approach. That was more happy with the outcome of the glider troops than I was with the paratroops. There we go. So here we have this dude crashed. Here we have the drift, and as you can see, some paratroops really drifted off the board here. Let's clean up those dice rolls. There we go. And here is a depressing sight to see where you have paratroops going in all sorts of directions as opposed to anywhere near their mission. This landing didn't go so badly. So here we're trying to establish as to whether they're going to be landing in buildings or woods, and recall that the Germans cannot do their one hex correction. Yeah, they're taking some fire from the ground. Hazardous movement. And which phase is this? Oh, that guy, I think, bit the dust. It's movement phase, all right. Task checks. See light AA fire going on. Morale checks for this fellow. Yeah. And hopefully before the end of this video, you'll get the crux of how the mechanics of gliders and paratroops work. And if you don't, you'll have some reference that you can go to and quickly find the items in the rule book. Kind of makes sense out of it. So this is how the cookie crumbled in U-23. No, Dennis and I did our best to respect the rules to the best of our ability, and we did take quite a few rule dives. And just to get to this point, it took us a couple of hours. And it was a very enjoyable game. However, I have to admit that prior to this scenario, the only experience I had with airborne troops was at the COI level. And I've seen experienced players use them effectively. I personally think that I need more experience before I can start to use them effectively. And mastering the rules, if you dedicate 2 to 3 hours, followed by a game with an experienced player, I think that most people can grasp them rather quickly. And I would encourage everybody to play a scenario with airborne troops. With that said, I hope you enjoyed this video. Give it a thumbs up if you liked it. I'll post my Discord handle in the description. So if you need a copy of that PDF, I can share it with you via Discord. What's up for grabs? For future videos, I hope to probably introduce some aspect of night rules for you, and go over an AAR for a night scenario. I'm also playing the Hasmo 4 free scenario. We're in the middle of the first game. It's going to take some time to get a sense of the scenario and hopefully provide you with an AAR there as well. And there's a couple of other projects, including making a couple of counters for the Greco-Italo War from 1940-41, and maybe creating a couple of starter kit scenarios there. So, a solemn Memorial Day for those that, on a belated basis for Canadians. I'm not too sure where when it is for the U.S. And a pleasant Thanksgiving to all my American friends coming up, and take care.